Let's look at some data, the type of data that we're not getting from our healthcare agencies, so we have to look, unfortunately, to England.
A few weeks back, Republican Senator Ron Johnson took to the Senate floor to argue against vaccine mandates, and he did so by attempting to use statistics from England to undermine the effectiveness of the COVID vaccines. So here's the stats that Ron Johnson is touting from Public Health England, and it's their technical briefing 23. But what Ron Johnson wants to do is to sell you only these percentages.
In England, of the 600,000 new cases of Delta, of the over 2,500 deaths, 63% of those deaths, 1,613 people were the fully vaccinated. 28% were with the unvaxxed.
Wow, that sounds damning, right? 63% of the deaths were vaccinated and only 28% were unvaccinated. But let's take a closer look. You see, when they break down the deaths on this chart here, they have an under 50 category and an over 50 category. But because COVID affects older people much more, you can see that 92% of those deaths are in the over 50 category, while just 8% of the deaths are in this under 50 category. But if you go over here to the vaccinated and unvaccinated columns, you can see that there's 3 times as many deaths in the under 50 unvaccinated column than vaccinated, but that trend is reversed in the over 50. But why is that? Well, it may have something to do with the fact that by June 17th of 2021, this story said about 9 in 10 people in England aged 50 and over were now fully vaccinated against COVID-19. And they estimated that at 90.3% of the people in this age group. Then let's add in this story from July 20th, 2021 that said there were still nearly 700,000 people over 50 who had yet to receive their first dose of a coronavirus vaccine. And that was about 1 in 30. And if you divide 1 by 30, you get 3.33% of over 50 people in England were unvaccinated in July. So as you can see, in the midst of the Delta surge in England, they had the over 50 people 90.3% vaccinated, just 3.3% unvaccinated, and the difference between the two would be partially vaccinated. So with a completely ineffective vaccine, you would expect to see 90% of the deaths be in the vaccinated, 3.3% be in the unvaccinated, and 6.4% somewhere in between. But what was Ron Johnson's statistics again?
63% of those deaths, 1,613 people were the fully vaccinated. 28% were with the unvaxxed.
Now call me crazy, but I don't think 90.3% of the population contributing to 63% of the deaths is the real headline here. I think you should really focus on the fact that just 3.3% of England's over 50 unvaccinated population contributed to 28% of the deaths. And if you believe Ron Johnson's statistics here, that leaves just 9% of the deaths left over for this partially vaccinated group, which is double the size of the unvaccinated group, but has just 1/3 the amount of deaths. And also, you got to take one more thing into consideration, and that's the fact that Public Health England actually prioritized groups to get vaccinated first, which meant that if you had any of these previous diseases or health problems, you were in line to get the vaccination first. Which leads me to believe that this unvaccinated group at least considered themselves more healthy than the people who did get vaccinated, yet they still died at a far higher rate than the vaccinated group. But sadly, this vaccine misinformation is nothing new for Ron Johnson, as he's been undermining vaccine confidence since Joe Biden won the 2020 election. But how did he feel about vaccines before the election? Well, for that, we have to go back to last year's vice presidential debate where Kamala Harris said this.
If the Trump administration approves a vaccine before or after the election, should Americans take it, and would you take it?
If the public health professionals, if Dr. Fauci, if the doctors tell us that we should take it, I'll be the first in line to take it. Absolutely. But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
So she essentially said she'd take the vaccine if the medical experts told her to, but not if it was the guy pitching unproven drugs and injecting disinfectant. That's always sounded pretty reasonable to me, but just listen to how Ron Johnson reacted the next morning.
Well, if she could actually experience shame, and I'm not sure any Democrat can, she should been ashamed of herself when Vice President said, Senator, would you please stop undermining people's confidence in a vaccine? I mean, that would be a terrible thing if we have an effective vaccine and a safe one, and that's the only one we'll release. But if you are out there undermining that possibility, that will cause people's deaths.
Isn't it interesting that when Ron Johnson thought Donald Trump would be reelected, he understood that undermining vaccine confidence would cause people's deaths. But after the election, He's twisting statistics and pushing misinformation to do exactly that. And what's worse is that not only are his antics causing people's deaths, but it's actually disproportionately affecting people in his own political party, where it's recently been revealed that counties that voted over 70% for Donald Trump are dying at far higher rates from COVID than those counties where Trump took less than 32% of the vote. But if Ron Johnson wants to use statistics from England, he won't mind if I do the same, right? That's because with the UK having one of the highest elderly vaccination rates in the world, their total COVID deaths in September 2021 were just over 4,000, despite having a population of just over 68 million. Now compare that to these 10 Republican-controlled states, all of which have Republican governors and GOP majorities in both state houses. And because of this, sadly, they also have vaccination rates that are well below the US average of 57%. Combined, these 10 states have a population that's 200,000 less than the UK, but in September 2021, their collective COVID deaths were more than 5 times that of the United Kingdom. In fact, in order for the UK to get to 20,462 deaths, you'd have to count every death from October 21st, 2021, all the way back to February 16th, 2021. That's 8 months in order to get that same amount of deaths that these 10 Republican states had in just September. So to use Ron Johnson's words from last year, I don't know if he can experience shame for undermining vaccine confidence, but he should.